graduated from college, I lived in Berlin for about a year with 80 other young people from the US, France, and countries throughout Eastern Europe. We were total strangers. We lived in this dorm together in East Berlin, went to classes together, and interned in the German parliament. As you can imagine, it was a lot of fun. Now this was about 20 years ago, before Facebook, and yes, even smartphones. And we slowly lost touch over the years. That is until recently when the war in Ukraine started. I started to hear from my former colleagues, and people were checking in on each other and seeing how everyone was doing and if anyone needed help. I heard about how one of our Romanian colleagues helped a Ukrainian's elderly parents cross the border to safety. A Polish friend helped my own husband, who's Ukrainian, find communities of refugees to help in Poland. That network that we had formed with people so different from each other, so far away from our homes, came together during a crisis to help. Now, we'd come to Berlin for professional reasons, but those social connections are what also mattered. Now, this experience influenced my life a lot, and not only because I met my husband there, but that's a story for another time, but it also influenced what I research today. I'm an economics professor here at UMass, and what I spend a lot of time studying is what happens when scientists and inventors meet in the same place. What I want to convince you about today is that meeting new and different people is powerful and often happens serendipitously or by chance. These serendipitous interactions are important for better science and a better society, whether that means meeting people across the globe like we did in Berlin or people right here in Amherst. But how do we know these serendipitous interactions matter so much? Well, I'm an economist, and economists love to use data to understand hard questions like this. I'm going to tell you about some of my own work and work of others to show you that meetings matter for getting new information, even when it's written down, for creating new collaborations, and even for being more tolerant of people who are different from you. Now, one setting I've studied a lot is what happened when the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. Now, before, Soviet citizens could rarely leave the Soviet Union. This meant they weren't traveling and meeting people abroad. This included scientists who weren't going to conferences and exchanging ideas with international colleagues. Scientists on both sides of the Iron Curtain were kept separate from each other, except that they each had access to articles translated, but they were sitting often in libraries like our own Du Bois Library. Then, in the 1990s, everything opened up. People started to travel, and a lot of people from Russia, Ukraine, and other Soviet republics immigrated here to the US. Now, what I wanted to know is, were American scientists reading those articles that were sitting in the library that had been translated? Or did not being able to meet each other prevent those ideas from flowing? So I put together a big data set linking the papers written by those Soviet scientists who immigrated to the US and which cities they came to. I could then measure how much US scientists in those same places that the Soviet scientists came to ended up using the Soviet-era work in their own research. So it turns out that the US scientists were not reading those articles sitting in the library. It took meeting each other for those ideas to be shared. This shows that it's really important to actually meet people in the same space to share knowledge and information, even when we already have access to it in the library or even today on the internet. There's a lot of knowledge and ideas out there, but we need more interactions often so that much of it is used. So meetings lead scientists to share new ideas. But how can meetings actually help influence how people feel about people different from them? Well, one of my favorite economics papers was by economists David Klingensmith, Asim Khwaja, and Michael Kramer, who recently won the Nobel Prize in economics. They wanted to see what would happen when you had people meeting from different countries in the same space and what that did in terms of their attitudes towards people different from them. Now, what they were looking at is the impact of attending a big religious event, Hajj, which is the pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca that every adult Muslim must make once in their lifetime. There, over 2 million men and women gather from over 100 countries in the same place. Now, some people might think that a gathering like this would lead people to be more radical and to make them less accepting of people from other religions. Now, what was brilliant is that these economists, they knew that there were more people that wanted to attend Hajj than actually could go. So there was a lottery to attend. So what they were able to do is they were able to track down the people who went and the people who didn't. And the people who went, it was some serendipity involved in who ended up going. And they then did a survey of the people who went and those who didn't. Now, what they found was really surprising. They found that people who went and met people from other countries there were actually more likely to believe in peace and equality and were more tolerant of people from other religions. And now this is all compared to people who didn't attend. One place I saw the importance of people meeting to understand each other better was when I worked in Sweden before I came to UMass at the Stockholm School of Economics. One thing I learned quickly is that an important part of Swedish culture is having coffee and pastries together, or fika, and it's really good. Now, Sweden has welcomed many refugees from places with conflict like Sudan, Somalia, and Syria. One thing communities in Sweden have tried that seems to work for building more tolerance and understanding is by having events where community members and newly arrived refugees have fika together, or coffee and pastries. Now, I told you about some examples where people from very different backgrounds and countries met in common spaces, and it led to some powerful results. But what about making new connections right here at UMass or in Amherst? Well, Tom Allen, a sociologist from MIT who studied this question, said famously that most collaborations happen among people who work less than 50 feet apart, so people in the same workplace. But how do we know if there are some connections and ideas we're missing out on if we just stick to meeting people in our 50-foot bubble? Well, I really like this New Yorker cartoon, which shows two scientists sitting in the same lab, and one says to the other, "I see by the current issue of Lab News, Ridgway, that you've been working for the last 20 years on the same problem I've been working on for the last 20 years. Now, this is trying to be funny or ironic, but just the other day, I actually felt like I was in this situation. Now, we happen to be coming out of a time, a strange time, when many of us are staying at home more and only meeting on Zoom. And we have yet to see if Zoom can actually be as good as meeting in person. Well, I was at a faculty mixer with other UMass faculty on Zoom, and we were randomly put into breakout rooms. And I wondered if we were being studied. I entered my breakout room, and there was another faculty member that I'd heard about, but I had never met. And neither of us was actually very excited about being there because it was one more Zoom meeting. But after we started talking, we started to realize that we shared a lot of common interests and had studied similar topics. And both of us thought, wow, why haven't we met before? Now, this shouldn't have been surprising to me because I study scientific collaborations and discoveries, and I know the power of serendipity or randomness in who ends up collaborating and sharing ideas. But I was really surprised. We often don't think that there are new ideas, new connections that we can make even in our own backyards. We often think that we've often made all the connections worth making. Well, I tried to study this question of serendipitous interactions with a team a few years ago. What we wanted to do was we wanted to see if randomly putting scientists together who work in the same institution, if that can actually lead to more collaborations. We did this experiment at Harvard Medical School with about 500 researchers, where we create an event that scientists are very used to going to, conferences, or a mixer, and they would share their ideas. Now, the twist was that we randomly assigned people to rooms, kind of like the Zoom breakout rooms, and there they presented their ideas. Now, if people already knew everyone who they should know, these random meetings in the rooms shouldn't matter for later collaborations. But what we found was that people who were randomly in the same room were then more likely to collaborate on grant applications and do research together. Now, what was cool is that we also tracked their interactions. So they were all wearing these devices. And what we saw is that when they first arrived at the event, people started to talk to other people like them. So women talked to women, men to men, people from the same department. But after they randomly met in those rooms, those conversations that started with people who were new and different continued during the breaks and the meal. So this shows that even in one university, there are these barriers that can prevent people from meeting new people and people that you could learn from and collaborate with. So while Tom Allen noticed that people tended to collaborate with the same people who work near them, this experiment shows that there are some connections you can make at the same workplace, even by venturing beyond those 50 feet. So how do you go about making these connections? Well, a lot of it is serendipity, and helping serendipity happen by talking to people even when it's outside of your comfort zone. I know it is for me. But think about it. Did you recently meet someone by chance in a class or at the grocery store and think, wow, it's so good I met them? Well, it turns out that a chance meeting like that at a photocopier is behind the development of the mRNA vaccine the mRNA technology that underlies the COVID vaccine that most of us got and is saving so many lives. Doctors Katalin Kariko and Drew Weissman, who developed the technology together, actually randomly met while using a photocopier at the University of Pennsylvania. And this started their collaboration. Now, before I was telling you that meeting people from really far away, from different countries like we did in Berlin, matters. But Dr. Kariko and Weissman, and like the scientists in our experiment, they were working in the same university. It just took a random meeting for them to connect, and later this led to a life-saving discovery. So my challenge to you is to get out of your comfort zone and try to help serendipity happen. Meet someone new and different from you. Have fika with someone. It might just lead to a new discovery or help someone. Now, maybe you can't jump on a plane and meet someone across the globe today, but you could start here on campus or right here in this room. Thank you.